also wanted to welcome our special guests, Senator Menendez and Congressman Pallone. And also, I see we have a number of our members in Seabright here, Council members Bieber, Graham, Gorman, John Lamnia, and let's see, Jeff Booker and Jack Hewler. We're all here today just to support the extension of federal legislation for the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP. It's a successful program as is, and the Congressman and Senator are here looking for bipartisan support for a 5-year extension along with improvements to that program. And we all thought that Seabright was a great representative community for that, since we unfortunately have had to use the program in the past, and even though we've made a lot of good changes to the town for flood resiliency, we still need it moving forward. So we're all here to support the extension of that legislation. So thanks again for coming today, and I'd like to introduce Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back on the boardwalk in Seabright, as well as being here with a champion for this district, Congressman Frank Pallone. Let me thank the mayor for his leadership in the community and for hosting us today, as well as Paul Jeffrey of the New Jersey Organizing Project and a community leader down in Ortley Beach. So, Paul, thank you for joining us once again, as well as Robert White, a lifelong resident of Monmouth County, the immediate past president of the New Jersey Realtors. Good to see you again. And least but not last, Chuck McQuillan, who is here, the owner of Eventide Grill at the marina and one of the millions of small business owners who rely on the National Flood Insurance Program. And appreciate members of the Municipal Council being here with us as well. We're here today because Congressman Pallone and I, together with members from New York, Louisiana, Florida, Maryland, and Mississippi, on a bipartisan basis, recently introduced landmark legislation to reauthorize and reform the National Flood Insurance Program. Our legislation provides greater stability for homeowners, business owners, and the real estate market. It's a critical lifeline as we grapple with two profound and simultaneous threats. The first threat is inflation, which is squeezing budgets everywhere, but especially for working and middle-class families in New Jersey. And the second threat is an existential threat, which is, of course, climate change. Here in Seabright, as well as in Port Monmouth and Union Beach, communities where I have consistently advocated for federal dollars alongside Congressman Pallone to improve the lives of our constituents, in all of these communities, climate change isn't some theoretical exercise. Up and down the Jersey Shore and in low-lying areas of our state, climate change is a reality that is already here. Stronger and more frequent storms, together with rising seas, pose an enormous risk to the well-being of our state. For proof, all you have to do is remember back to October 29 of 2012, one of the darkest days in New Jersey's history, when the wind and rain of Superstorm Sandy devastated the Garden State and its neighbors. Once the floodwaters receded and the destruction was laid bare, I made a promise to the people of New Jersey. I vowed that I would not stop, we would not rest, until federal relief efforts were brought to bear, making whole what was lost in the storm. I got to work in the Senate, fighting tooth and nail until Congress passed and President Obama signed a $50 billion Sandy recovery package. And I think back to the conversations I had with my colleagues when trying to convince them in the Senate to support the recovery package. I noted that New Jersey has always lent its support to states like Texas and Florida and Kentucky when they needed help. We are, after all, the United States of America. But when it came to time to support New Jerseyans who lost their homes and businesses in our hour of greatest need, some of my colleagues had the audacity to say no. Well, not on my watch. And despite cruel and callous objections by some in Congress, we finally passed the Sandy relief package. We set aside $50 billion for our recovery, authorizing the president through FEMA to approve public assistance projects faster, disperse federal aid quicker, and get our state back on its feet after the largest natural disaster in our state's history. It's one of my proudest achievements in public service. A copy of that bill, that law, hangs in my office. And yet, in many ways, the legislation was only the beginning. When it came to light that FEMA and the insurance companies were systematically lowballing New Jerseyans on their Sandy claims, we led the fight to reopen all claims and adjudicate them fairly, resulting in an additional $260 million being paid out to Sandy survivors that they were entitled to. When flood insurance premiums for recovering Sandy homeowners were poised to skyrocket, we passed legislation that stopped the price hike. We created the Office of the Flood Insurance Advocate, which helps policyholders navigate the complex claims and appeals process. All of these efforts, year after year for more than a decade after the storm, we are keeping with our solemn vow to support the Garden State on its road to recovery. And we haven't given up, just as New Jerseyans haven't given up, which is why today we're adding another step to that journey. Our National Flood Insurance Program Reauthorization Bill implements the lessons that we learned after Superstorm Sandy. It makes sweeping reforms to make the programs more sustainable, affordable, fair, and efficient. It makes premiums more affordable so that we can grow the program, get more people to use the National Flood Insurance Program. It invests in risk mapping and pre-disaster mitigation to deal with the long-term effects of flooding. And it redesigns the claims process so that the nightmares we saw after Sandy never happen again. Our bill focuses on expanding the prevention and mitigation efforts that have been such a success in New Jersey. Last month I was in Hoboken with the governor to celebrate the opening of a new innovative park that underneath it has a nearly 2 million gallon storage tank to hold stormwater runoff. The week before, Congressman Pallone and I were in Monmouth Beach to announce a federal grant to help move a critical pump station away from the flood risk and towards higher ground. It's just one of the many ways that New Jersey leads by example, serving as a model for risk communities all across our country. At the end of the day, we need to reframe our entire disaster recovery framework so that we can rebuild better, rebuild safer, and rebuild more reliably after floods and storms. Because for every dollar that we spend on mitigation, the federal government saves $6 in disaster relief funding. I like those odds, especially in light of the fact that we used to talk about 100-year floods as if that was an accurate description. Because of climate change, though, we're seeing what we thought were once 100 years floods more and more frequently. In some cases, we've seen them in consecutive years, or more often, even in places that haven't had a history of flooding. Hurricane Ida showed us that a storm can travel from the Gulf of Mexico through Louisiana and across Appalachia, arriving on New Jersey's doorsteps with terrifying force. We can't afford to be unprepared when it comes to people's homes and businesses anymore. After all, a home is often the single greatest asset that any New Jerseyan will own. It's the one asset that ties you over during ups and downs in the market. It's what you hope to pass down to your children. And yet right now, too many Americans in coastal states like ours are in danger of having their greatest wealth builder washed away by a flood. 55 years ago, the federal government stood up a system to protect at-risk homeowners through the National Flood Insurance Program. But today, FEMA's own estimates show that it's expected to lose more than 1 million policyholders by the end of the decade. It's no surprise, really, when you consider that its new risk assessment methodology, known as Risk Rating 2.0, is set to raise premiums for homeowners by as much as 18% every single year until policies reach their full new rate. In many places, the new cost will be as high as 2, 3, or even 4 times the amount of their prior rate. Here in Seabright, for example, the average premium goes from $1,132 to $2,423. Just up the road in Kingsburg, the average premium more than triples, from $1,000 to $3,500. That's a non-starter at a time when families are still struggling with the high cost of living, and when we need to do everything we can to encourage homeowners to sign up for the program. After all, insurance is about spreading risk across the greatest pool possible, The lower the pool, the higher the premiums. The broader the pool, the lesser the premiums. Right now, only 4% of homeowners, 4%, have a flood insurance policy, leaving our nation's economy financially exposed to the extreme weather events we know are coming. Our bill, the National Flood Insurance Program Reauthorization Act, would cap premiums increases at 9% annually, the rate at which they've been growing at for the last 7 years. Instead of jacking up the prices so homeowners can't afford to carry flood insurance at all, our legislation keeps the program affordable. It supercharges mitigation investments in repetitive lost properties so that the NFIP can be put back on stable financial footing. And in the face of climate change, we refuse to abandon the communities who live on its front lines. As I've said, a home is the greatest financial asset a family can own, and we need to make sure that flood insurance remains affordable in order to protect it. Our bill does all of this and more, which is why I continue to encourage all of my colleagues in the Congress to join us in this fight. Let's reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program and help it shine as the lifeline that it has been for more than half a century. And with that, let me turn over the podium to someone who has been such a stalwart and steadfast partner in this fight, your Congressman, Congressman Frank Pallone.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Let me, I just have to return the compliment, but seriously, I don't think anyone has done more to try to protect the shore in the aftermath, not only before then, but certainly in the aftermath of Sandy, than Senator Menendez. And I guess it's easy. I don't know that anybody here forgets Sandy because it was so horrible. But of course, if you look around, it's easy to forget because everything looks so good, Mayor. I mean, and the council. I mean, you know, it's a beautiful day. The sun looks like it might actually be coming out. And we see all kinds of rebuilding that has taken place. Rebuilding that, for the most part, you know, raised homes and businesses up so that they have more protection in the event of another storm. But those of us who were here during Sandy, which is almost everybody here, know how bad it was then. And the person who was on the scene constantly in the aftermath of Sandy was Senator Menendez. Not just to come down and, you know, have the TV cameras look at him, but in terms of actual ideas about what should be done to prepare for a future storm. He mentioned a few things, right? He talked about how he was in Monmouth Beach with the sewer plant in Northeast. Actually, it's not just Monmouth Beach, but it covers all the towns in the area. And he talked about, of course, with the New Jersey Organizing Project, he was up at Port Monmouth in the last year, here today, and constantly working with constituents. You know, people don't think of senators as dealing with the day-to-day constituent services, but in fact that's what his office does, and that's what he does to try to make sure that people were able to get payment on their flood insurance and get FEMA dollars. So I just want to thank him for all that. But this is another manifestation. He said in the aftermath of Sandy that we have to reform the federal flood insurance program, and it has had some changes, some better, some not so good. But we feel that we've learned a lot of lessons from Sandy and other storms that need to be addressed through a reauthorization of the federal flood insurance program, and that's what this bill is all about. And he stressed, of course, that it's bipartisan. You know, in New Jersey, we have two of our Republican senators, Van Drew and Tom Kaine, as well as all the Democratic members of the House delegation. And others from Louisiana, and he mentioned others from Louisiana and other states, the senators that are Republican that are co-sponsoring this. So we want you to understand that this is something we think really can happen. There are some hearings that have been held in the House, even this session in the last 6 months, to try to address some of these things. So we do feel that this is something that we can move in both the Senate and the House. But I don't want to take away from Bob, and I'm trying not to repeat what he said, because he really is the person who is the primarily responsible for this bill, and I'm, of course, the House sponsor. But I just wanted to say just a few things about, that I wanted to mention with regard to the bill. We need to do this in part because of what we call Risk 2.0. Risk 2.0 was a reform that was put in place since Sandy, and it has had some helpful aspects to it because it creates a premium based on your individual home ownership rather than something that's for the state or for the surrounding area. Each policyholder gets a risk analysis. But the problem is, as the senator pointed out, is that too many of the towns at the Jersey Shore and also in North Jersey, because this affects all the state, whether you're on the ocean or you're on a river or a bay, is that for a lot of people it has resulted in significant increases in their premiums. And the issue of affordability is one that we're so concerned about and that Senator Menendez is concerned about. And so one of the things that we do is to say, and this is probably the most important one, is that we say that the most you can have is an annual rate increase of 9% to keep the program affordable for homeowners. About 100,000 people dropped the flood insurance program in the last year once Risk 2.0 went into effect because of the increased cost of premiums. And we estimate at least that many each year, if we don't do something to change it, will drop the insurance. And so what Bob mentioned about how fewer and fewer people having flood insurance is going to only be aggravated if we don't do something. So the main thing we do is try to address the affordability issue with that 9% cap. We also have a 90-day grace period for policyholders who can't pay their premium initially. Like, in other words, you might just not be able to pay, so we give you a 90-day grace period, which doesn't exist now. And then we also have a voucher for people of low income where they can apply for a voucher, which essentially gives them a subsidy to help pay for the insurance depending upon their income. So those are the main things I wanted to mention in terms of the affordability issue. The senator mentioned some of them. But the other thing is that we also think that a lot more needs to be done, not only in terms of prevention, but also counting the prevention. So as you know, in Seabright and other areas, we have Army Corps projects. We have other flood control projects that Bob and I have been involved with in the Bayshore, right? Well, right now, the FEMA process, the flood insurance process doesn't take those into account. So in other words, if there's been a major Army Corps project, beach replenishment, flood control in the Bayshore, something along the river, bulkhead, whatever, that really that was done for mitigation purposes, that should be figured into your insurance, because those things are done in order to make the storms less damaging and less harmful. But right now, the flood insurance doesn't take that into consideration. And our bill will do that. And the last thing I'm going to mention, without getting too specific, is that we saw so many situations after Sandy and even after that with other places, other storms like Ida in other parts of the state, including Middlesex County that I represent, where people were not getting the full amount that was necessary to rebuild. So we addressed that. Where there was fraud and engineering reports that were issued fraudulent. So we have an oversight process in here that says that if you find out that an engineer or an insurer or somebody's committing fraud, that they can just be eliminated from the program as a form of punishment. And so those situations where people were treated unfairly are also addressed in this legislation. But I want to stop there. There's so many other aspects of it. I don't want to keep talking about every aspect of it, but I just want you to understand that Senator Menendez and I worked very hard to try to address the concerns that we saw in the aftermath of Sandy, and we really think that this bill accomplishes that. So the next person I'd like to introduce now is Paul Jeffrey, who was with the New Jersey Organizing Project, and you must understand that they were the organization that was most effective in the aftermath of Sandy in helping people and also suggesting to us ideas to reform the system, including the flood insurance that we're talking about today. So, Paul, if you'd come on.
Thank you.
Paul's right here. Right over here.
Thank you for those great comments. Good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Jeffrey. I'm a resident of Ortley Beach, where 99% of the homes were damaged in Superstorm Sandy. As a result, I'm all too familiar with the shortcomings of the NFIP program and the FEMA grant programs that are supposed to help us with storm recovery. I want to sincerely thank Senator Menendez and Congressman Pallone for putting this legislation forward. It's long overdue to have reform of the NFIP. Senator Menendez has had our backs since shortly after the storm. I'm sure he remembers shortly afterwards we walked down Ocean Avenue, or what was left of Ocean Avenue in Ortley Beach. The homes were all literally gone. There were remnants of the surf club left behind. The infrastructure was basically destroyed. And he said that day, I'm going to help you guys come back, and I'm going to make this process of recovery better. So I want to thank him especially. He's been working with me in our organization, New Jersey Organizing Project, ever since. So shortly after Superstorm Sandy, I learned about this organization called New Jersey Organizing Project, or we call NJOP. We're a group of New Jersey Shore residents, and in fact some inland residents as well now, equally suffering from the complex and highly confusing storm recovery programs. And I'm here today to represent that organization, which I've been working with ever since the first time I learned about them. We have literally helped thousands with recovery from Superstorm Sandy, and now we've returned our attention to aiding people recovering from Ida. It seems with the Ida recovery that we learned few lessons from Superstorm Sandy, and in fact my understanding is that some of the payments back, the timing for the payments, are even more complicated and more delayed than we experienced with Sandy, which I find impossible to believe. But that's what I'm hearing from the people who are still waiting for money. So I personally, and NJOP, see three really strong benefits of this program, this proposed legislation. First, we experienced terrible issues with the insurance companies denying claims, saying certain things shouldn't be covered. They've altered records, claims of foundation damage that weren't true, and on and on and on. So we need this oversight that's in, of the write your own insurance companies, that's in this legislation. The evidence for me that underpayment was clear was that FEMA came back, looked at what my insurance company had agreed to pay, and said, guess what? You're right. So I did manage to get some additional money from FEMA to cover what the insurance company said shouldn't have been, but really should have. Unfortunately, all the rest came out of our retirement funds. So I just pray it never happens again, because my retirement funds cannot take a second hit like we did from Sandy. A related issue to that is the contractor fraud. There were contractors in my local area who stole people's money. They either didn't finish the work, or in some cases, they didn't even start the work. They just took the money and then disappeared. And it's time we found a way, and hopefully this legislation will do that, identify these contractors, some move state to state, and continually abuse abuse people. It's time to track them down and have FEMA or the NFIP program terminate them from doing any storm recovery work. The second thing that I'm encouraged about is the simplifying of the insurance claims process. This legislation will hopefully do that. There were multiple overlapping programs. They were complicated. They were hard to understand. No one could understand them. And the result of that is a disaster. And that's the reason we ended up with a bunch of clawbacks. People didn't even know that if they filed for this and filed for that, here 5 years later, they'd come back and say, oh, this was duplication of benefits. You owe us $30,000 back. That's got to stop. We've got to simplify the process so that can't happen again. The third thing that I can't emphasize enough that this legislation provides is increased mitigation funding. If we can do more to raise homes, to provide all kinds of flood protection, protection from flooding rivers in inland, as you heard Senator Menendez said, it pays back 6 to 1. Yet the mitigation funds are minuscule compared to what we're spending to recover after storms. And these storms are going to keep coming, by the way, which is why I think the mitigation is even more important. Everybody says, oh, Superstorm Sandy isn't going to happen again. Something like it is going to happen again. Look at the flooding we had up in Rockland in New York last night. Unprecedented amount of rain coming down. The climate change is happening. The storms are getting more frequent, and we are going to need this money for recovery. I'm going to make a last few comments about New Jersey Organizing Project, and I talked mostly just now about the financial distress that everybody suffered when these storms come. But We're 10 years past Superstorm Sandy, and I still see a tremendous amount of physical and emotional suffering from people who went through the storm. Part of that suffering is because of the storm, but part of that suffering is also from the battles that people had to do with FEMA and with NFIP, and it's taken a tremendous toll on the health of our communities. And so this legislation doesn't just help with financial recovery, I hope. It helps with the emotional and the health recovery after things like this. And this is where our New Jersey Organizing Project for the past 10 years has provided tremendous support. Even for the people who got the money, we get together every couple of weeks. Anybody can come on. They can get help with the issues they have, and most importantly, get the emotional help to help them get back on their feet. So I seriously hope that this legislation will get some proper attention by all of Congress. It's long overdue that this improved legislation happen. I'm hoping we get all the congressmen from the other states to come together and agree that we need a much improved NFIP. And I want to thank again Senator Menendez and Congressman Pallone for sponsoring this legislation that I sincerely hope will help. Thank you so much. And I'm going to introduce Robert White, who is right behind me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robert White. I'm a realtor representing home buyers and sellers in Monmouth, Ocean, and Middlesex counties, and the past president of New Jersey Realtors, which currently represents 61,000 realtors in our great state. We want to thank Senator Menendez and Congressman Pallone for including New Jersey Realtors today. New Jersey Realtors has closely followed the National Flood Insurance Program and their updates and impacts for many years, and applauds Senator Menendez and Congressman Pallone for their continued efforts and support for a long-term reauthorization plan, which would continue to protect policyholders across the state from the unintended consequences of Risk Rating 2.0. This legislation will help stabilize our real estate markets, especially in flood-vulnerable areas, and it will help reduce costs in communities like these. We applaud any effort to further reduce financial barriers to home ownership. Again, on behalf of our 61,000 members, we thank you for your work for all New Jerseyans. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So our cleanup person, but it's probably more important than any of us maybe, is Charles Chuck McQuillan, who's the owner of Eventide Grill in Seabright and the Navesink Marina.
Thank you very much. Senator and Congressman, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and I am excited that what's going on in our Congress, and I think it's something that's really needed, and we learned an awful lot from Sandy. I can tell you personally, at one time we owned 7 properties in Seabright, and we had construction going on after Sandy on all 7 properties, and we were able to get a loan, and we had personal funds, and we started right away doing this reconstruction. And very important, I want to tell you, everybody here, the people in the building department of Seabright were just unbelievable. We'd give them some plans, and they would 24, 48 hours approve it, come down and look at it, and put a stamp on it, and we started work. So they get an awful lot of credit for what happened after Sandy. And the increases, I think, are only a part what has to be done to go to do this further. What we've done personally is we've reduced the amount of insurance we have, and we've in that we have taken on a responsibility. If it comes back again, it's going to cost us more money. However, every time you have a storm, you own a building, and the ground floor of the building is ruined. The people to stop paying rent, but you still got to pay your mortgage and you got to pay your insurance, and it's a very costly procedure. And we were lucky that we were able to mitigate a lot of this, and we found some good contractors, and we accomplished this, our work, and we opened our restaurant up, believe it or not, the following May. So we did really a great job. And the only last thing I want to say is I think part of what they're doing today is a great thing, However, we ought to be thinking about beach replenishment and dredging in the rivers, and looking at bulkhead repair or replacement. And that has a lot to do with keeping this community thriving, and the next one we can walk through and be done in a few months. I thank you very much for having this opportunity to talk to you, and I am so happy with this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. I will mention that the Shrewsbury and Navesink River dredging is scheduled to begin when, Matt? Or contract? Next week. Oh, it's actually there. All right. And then Senator and I are working on the next phase of the beach protection too.
Okay, a couple of on-topic questions. Oh, okay. All right. Very brief before we go to the on-topic questions, and I know I don't know if the Congressman knows. I have to catch a train back to Washington to get there for votes, so we'll take a couple of on-topic questions for the Hispanic press. Let me synthesize what we just said. Estamos hoy en Seabright con el congresista Pallone y los líderes comunitarios para anunciar nuestro nuevo esfuerzo para renovar y reautorizar la ley de seguro de inundación de agua. Es de suma importancia poder hacer esto, porque tanto de nuestras comunidades en las playas de New Jersey, pero también en ciudades grandes como Patterson y otros que sufrieron inundación de aguas, si no hay seguro para eso, los que son los dueños de casa pierden su casa, pierden la oportunidad de reconstruir su casa. Y la casa es lo más importante en el sentido de lo que uno va a ser dueño. Así que tenemos que preservar ese derecho, tenemos que preservar esa oportunidad, tenemos que preservar un seguro que es costeable y que aprende de las lecciones de la tormenta Sandy que pasó 11 años atrás. Y eso es lo que estamos anunciando hoy. Happy to take one or two on-topic questions if there are any. First from the press, and then I'm happy to, if there are none, with the thanks to the city, and then I'm happy to, we can go answer his question. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you.